Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Product Angle Show. On today's episode, we have a product manager from Capital One, Amber. Welcome, Amber.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon.
So, as I mentioned, Amber is a product manager, and prior to that, she was working at Deloitte, and she's also held various accounting and marketing roles. One interesting fact that I discovered while going through Amber's social media profiles is that she learned how to speak Mandarin. How and why how did you get into speaking Mandarin?
That's so funny that you found that. When I was in grad school, I wanted to do a global internship. I wanted to get some global experience. So I ventured off to Beijing. And while I was there, I took an internship and did a class in the evening. So my Mandarin is very, very, very minor, but I can get around, I can get around the city if I needed to.
Excellent. That's still awesome to know that. So this next question, you cannot use the Mandarin as the response. So
Okay.
Tell us something that we cannot Google about you.
Something that you cannot Google about me. Probably that I am like a avid home decor, like cleaning person. I love like all the HGTV stuff. You probably wouldn't know that about me just looking at me, but you're in my home now, so maybe you can see that.
No, it looks beautiful. So how did you get into product management? Tell us the story, because a lot of times what I've heard people say is that they've fallen into product management. So I'd love to hear your perspective and how you got into product management.
Yeah, I'm going to say a similar story for me as well. So I was a business student coming out of business school and working at Deloitte Technology Consulting. And I was doing, manual testing, that kind of really in the weeds testing and manual, like writing the test scripts. And I really wanted to get more of that design thinking, human-centered kind of view. I didn't really know what that was at the time. I just wanted to get closer to the people who were actually using the things that we're building. So I found out about a little small pocket of the firm that was called Deloitte Digital. And they had this role called a business experience designer that I was really interested in just by finding it on the careers page. And so I reached out to some folks who might have known some other people who were there. And I actually was told no. I was told, like, you don't have that much experience in this role. So we're going to tell you no for now. And like maybe in a few years you can come back and we'll see how it goes. So that was like my journey to figure out how to get there started then. I was like, okay, I got to figure out how to get the experience. And I took an internal class, if you will. It was kind of an after hours class. And then after the class, you did a kind of sandbox environment of building a product with your other cohort members. So that essentially was how I learned about product management. I learned Agile. I became certified for Agile. And then I kind of just jumped into the role of product manager. And that's really how I learned about it. So it was definitely falling into it. It started off just by a spark of me seeing a job description of something that seemed really cool and something that I knew aligned with exactly what I love to do.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So tell us what can we learn about your session. I'm going to head off from the screen in a few minutes, but can you just give us a quick overview of what the next, your session is going to be about?
Absolutely. So I want to just share my experiences working in both a government space with government clients when I was in consulting, as well as now in a regulated environment in financial services, and how being a product manager is a little different than what may be seemingly normal in the rest of the industry. So just a few nuances and things to consider if you're trying to get into the space of product management within financial services, or fintech for that matter.
Perfect. So I'm going to bring up your presentation and I'm going to head off the screen. So all yours, Amber. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And thanks for everyone who's watching this right now with me during your lunchtime or whatever time it is where you are. So I've already kind of introduced what we'll talk about today. And I definitely encourage you to use the chat feature. Just a few things. I'll kind of go over my background. I talked a little bit about this and how I got into product. But we'll also talk about my path to technology and financial services, and then a few nuances and working in the regulated environment. And then obviously question and answer. Feel free to drop your questions in the comments. I have that up so I can see, and I'll be answering those along the way as well. So let's just jump right in with some intros. If you guys don't mind, if you're watching this live, if you can just type where are you located? What level of product manager are you? And what products are you working on? And I'd love to just engage throughout this session. So I'll keep an eye on the chat, like I mentioned, but feel free to drop some information. Love to interact with you guys. And then I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I am a digital product manager at Capital One. As mentioned, former technology consultant. So really kind of fell into the world of technology, starting in consulting, and truly appreciate that because it taught me what we call like tech fluency and really the mechanics and the underlying thought process about how we build technology. Aside from that, and kind of the underlying thing that I also do is the advocacy for women and minorities in technology. So you'll see me a lot on speaking environments like this, and just trying to help mentor whoever I can. Another fun fact that I probably could have mentioned is that prior to finding technology in business, I actually wanted to be an entertainment attorney. So huge shift, right curve there. But still near and dear. I love sports and love entertainment. So love that industry. And then I already mentioned my other fun fact, which is that I love home decor. So I'll take you kind of through my path now and talk a little bit about how I got from getting an MBA and working in technology consulting to from client service to industry in Capital One. So I got my MBA at Hampton University, and I actually focused in marketing and advertising. In that space, I really wanted to do more of the like branding, brand management, marketing, things of that sort that kind of led me to working with users and understanding the psychology of why people choose certain products or go towards certain marketing and kind of getting that mindset to help sell products essentially. And so when I got into technology, I was doing something totally different from that. I was actually doing manual testing, like I mentioned earlier, for a government client, huge testing effort and modernization effort. And so it was a lot of working with developers, understanding what the requirements were, testing and finding those defects and bugs, logging them manually logging them in a system of record, and making sure that they were alleviated and closed. And so if you can imagine doing that every single day, it got a little bit tedious. And so I was, okay, what else can I do? Like, how can I get back to that creative side of my brain that I love to work? And so that's when in 2015, I found the Technology Fellowship Program, which is essentially a incubator program, if you will, or a education program to teach about the different product development roles. So there was UX, there's UI, there was product, which we called BXD or business experience design. There was technology or engineering team who were learning both iOS and Android. There was even a content strategy team who was focused on just the language and the experience that the users would have from the verbiage. And then we also had a QA team who was also a part of that engineering team who is learning how to actually test and make sure they're validating our product. So it was an awesome opportunity to learn exactly how to do product management alongside other cohort members and kind of play in a very sandbox safe environment to create a product, and then have also mentors who are more senior than us teaching us about the actual the way of the road, so once we did get into our role, it was great to have an experience and example to set from. From there, I got invited, if you will, or recruited into the Deloitte Digital Studio, which is kind of small pockets around the world, small offices around the world that focus on delivery. And I was a junior product manager and kind of worked my way up into the senior product manager role. And along the way, I wanted that continuous learning. So I got my certified Scrum Master certification in Agile. And then I also did a user experience design class at General Assembly, which I totally love. I think the thread that you'll see across my career is that I'm always learning. I'm always seeking to find something else that I don't know. So if you're watching this and you haven't taken any kind of courses or anything, and you're new to product management, I would absolutely recommend finding a class, whether that's product school or GA or whatever, resources close to you. It's just great to have that foundational knowledge. So then last year, I actually transitioned to Capital One. So I found that my experience in client service was one that was a little bit limited for me, from my personal desires in product management, because I wanted to be able to really say I truly worked with long-term products that were seen through several iterations, and I actually own the roadmap. It's hard to do that when you're in client service because you don't really own what the clients are paying you for. You're actually doing what they're asking you to do. So Capital One was a great opportunity for me to kind of pivot and learn how to actually take ownership of my product. And so since being here, I've actually got my AWS certification, just a cloud practitioner, which is the foundational level. And it's really helped a lot because Capital One is one of the banks that are, I think, not the only bank that's on the cloud 100%. So awesome learning opportunity and great things along the path. So still going, who knows what's next, but this is my journey thus far. All right, and I see you guys are dropping some things in the chat. So again, feel free to ask questions. So for the focus for today's conversation, we're just going to focus on what it's like to be in a financial services industry as a product manager. How does that look with when you're working with regulators, when you're working against other, initiatives that are equally as important as the user feedback, if not more important, just for their safety and security, and how you actually play that out into a product. So I'll focus on three nuances for the sake of this conversation. And obviously, if you have other questions around others, I'm happy to dive into those. One is the relationship with regulators, and we'll talk about what I mean by relationship. It's definitely one of those back and forth. You don't want to just be receiving. You don't just want to be giving. You want to always have that open lines of communication. And then we'll talk about the concept of responsible innovation, which was kind of deemed or defined by the OCC as something that we're all expected to do. It's a kind of an expectation in the fintech and financial services industry. And then lastly, I'll talk about the role of controls and risk management, which were two terms that I actually learned as I got into at Capital One. Learned them when I first joined, but now they are a part of my everyday speak. So understanding what that means and why it's important. So first, let's take a look at the relationship with regulators. So I'm just going to, the blanket statement here, define it for anyone who doesn't know what a regulator is or you haven't worked in a regulated space. A regulator can be defined as a member of any band or committee, organized to preserve order before the establishment of a regular legal authority. So in layman's terms, that means they're making sure that they're laying out the expectations, the legal compliance matters in which we are supposed to, companies and organizations are supposed to adhere to for the safety of a citizen. That's very important because if you think about it, that's really kind of synonymous for what a product manager is. We are thinking about the security, we're thinking about the how we innovate, but then again in a responsible way, but for the sake of our user. So user, citizen, someone we're really kind of being that gatekeeper, making sure that we're always thinking about that end user or that end stakeholder. And then in financial services, our regulators, users, and business stakeholders all play a role when you're prioritizing your features. So one thing that I noticed as a product manager, we always have to think about, like, there's some certain things that we need to do to keep the engine running, as we say, or like make sure that we're in alignment with what we're supposed to be adhering to, which is our regulatory compliance. We'll always have those on our roadmap. Those will always be standard items that we're trying to work to, we're trying to improve, we're trying to prioritize, and they're all for the safety and the security of our client customers' data. And that's really important. So while a user may have a feature that they really, really want, or we're hearing other stakeholders and parts of the business try to push for other features, we have to weigh those against each other and say, is the cyber or the security item that we're looking at equally as important, or if not more important than a new button style on a UI? Like, it's not to say that there's either one is right or wrong, but those are the kind of decisions that in discussions we have to have in terms of timing, priority, capacity, and again, making sure that we set those things in alignment. So unlike other industries and financial services, the regulatory bodies, they provide oversight and compliance. And they should be considered at each phase of the product life cycle. So I haven't worked in any other industry, but I know from my personal experience, I'm always thinking about the regulator experience. And this really is an experience for them we're trying to create. What information can we go ahead and put forth? What kind of thought process can we already go ahead and have in order to be compliant? So moving on to responsible innovation. This is actually one of my favorite topics. It's something that I learned early this year, and I've been like running with it, and I love the fact that it exists. So the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, otherwise known as the OCC, basically defined this term as one that's in partnership with their stakeholders. So if you think about it, fintechs, startups that are in the fintech world, financial services and companies, and anyone in this industry, really, we have a responsibility to be compliant, and we have a responsibility to our customers to make sure we're doing due diligence with their data. And so responsible innovation is essentially this thought process that it's okay to be innovative. It's okay to push the envelope and think about how can we build products in a cool, innovative way? How can we make sure we're doing things differently and shaking up the industry and disrupting what financial services had historically been, which is kind of brick and mortar and kind of just changing and not really changing at all, and actually incorporate some new emerging technology, but in a responsible way. So one of the things that I really love that the OCC has actually rolled out had been these kind of road shows, I call them, essentially where they're going city to city and major cities, and they're speaking with fintech founder. They're speaking with folks who actually want to have like an office hours chat for an hour, just about the concepts of what their business is, what they're looking to do, what features they're excited about, what they're hearing from their users. And the OCC will basically give feedback and say, yeah, that's great, but let's alter this. And so I think it's really interesting, the partnership that's there. And this is kind of what I alluded to with the relationship. It is important to have a relationship with our regulators. It is important to think about their experience in addition to the user's experience. And what I mean by that is, bringing your regulator along your entire product development lifecycle is really important. Incorporating their feedback at every phase of the journey as well is also equally as important. So bottom line here, the regulator empathy is a perspective I aim to maintain throughout my entire role, whether that's if I'm doing a feature enhancement or refinement, or if I'm doing a long-term vision and strategy with my product leads. It's something that I'm always thinking about. How can we include our regulator perspective? How might we delight them and make sure we're enhancing their experience too? All right, and I see one question from Sebastian in the chat. So which product are you working on at Capital One? I am sorry, I didn't mention that. I am working on our enterprise imaging. So any customer document or image that we receive or store, that is my platform. It's multiple products, and I'm kind of running the platform right now for all of those. So hope that answered your question, Sebastian. All right. So moving on to kind of the roles of controls and risk management and what that means. So just a couple terms here and things that are really important when you're in financial services. Root cause analysis and remediation planning. So anytime there's an issue or anytime there's something that happened that was not planned, it's really important to do the root cause analysis. And this is kind of standard in any kind of problem solving space you may be in, but especially in financial services, it's very important to have a clear kind of repeatable process of how you do root cause analysis, how you do remediation planning, what's the risk assessment. Those are kind of questions that you'll always hear recurring. And it's important to always speed up on those things as soon as they happen, because someone's going to ask. So what I try to think about when we think about that regulator experience is how can we put forth that information without them having to ask? How can we make sure we're planning for these things and properly documenting along the way as we build and as we test and as we iterate, opposed to having to surge on creating documentation well after they've already asked for it. So this is just an example there. And then for risk identification, as a product manager, one of our responsibilities is to actually identify the risk up front, and to already have a running list of what are the possible risks, what are the potential risks, and always try to poke holes in our own platforms and our own products. So in addition to doing this, the goal is to never have someone else tell you something that you didn't already raise. And I can definitely say with working within financial services is there's teams and organizations of people within the company who are always thinking about what are the risks, how can we mitigate them, how can we say that we know this is a risk and self-identify this and work to mitigate this early and often. And then obviously some standard procedures around logging. So this is kind of table stakes when it comes to risk management. It's you need to have some sort of platform or product that's logging these risks and creating some transparency for whoever the stakeholders may be, just so that you have a running log, you have the details all in one place, and you're able to clearly articulate what those risks are. And then lastly is control. So this is actually something that we didn't really talk about this much when I was in product management at Deloitte or serving government clients. And so what I learned about controls is that they're really important. So the one question that I always get, so what controls are in place to ensure this won't happen again? And you should always have an answer to that. As soon as you have a problem and as soon as you identify an issue, you should always be thinking about, okay, our mitigation strategy is this, and then this is how we know this won't happen again by implementing this change or doing this fix. Really, really important to think about how you can mitigate those risks and incorporate those controls. And again, testing your controls. So this kind of gets back to that core software development lifecycle. It's not only the building, but it's also in deploying and developing it, or developing and deploying it, but it's also the how do we test it? How do we validate time and time again that this control is still working? So coming up with some recurring and repeatable timeframes that you can actually say, okay, we've tested this annually, this control still works, this is no longer an issue. It may seem a little repetitive or redundant, but it's actually very important as you're working in this space to make sure if there was an issue of any sort, if there's anything that could come up that's not ideal for either the user, the data, anything that's related to the product, that's going to cause a disruption in the product performance, what's the control that we have in order to make sure this won't happen again? Awesome. So I don't see any other questions right now. So that essentially is what I wanted to chat with you guys about. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about a few other questions, and just to recap, when you're working in financial services as a product manager, you will do all of the product manager things. So I'm not going to go through the laundry list, but in addition to that, you should absolutely be thinking about an additional stakeholder who probably has more leverage than others. You obviously will work with marketing, and you'll work with legal, and you'll work with other stakeholders that are all having a vested interest in your product. But your regulator is probably the most important, and everyone in that larger stakeholder group internally should all be marching toward that same goal as well. Everyone should think about our regulator is an experience that we have to be mindful of, and so thinking about how you can incorporate them in building your product with the most efficiency, obviously with the user feedback and the user journey as number one in terms of the features, but in terms of the transparency and how and the mechanics of the data. Making sure that's compliant. So with that, I'm gonna see if there's any questions about this presentation. We have a few other questions we'll get through as well, but in the meantime, feel free to follow me on socials. I'm very active there and happy to answer any questions you have. All right, so I see a question from Raj. What are some things you learned working in a regulatory environment that surprised you? That's a good question. I would say working in a regulatory environment, it's not as, I think I was expecting it to be very like cut and dry, like not anything fun, like, it's kind of like dreary and old, like are antiquated, because everything needs to be modernized and everything is old. But I will say there's a lot of cool, innovative things that we're able to do in the regulated space. And so in financial services specifically. So, machine learning, I saw someone brought up AI, like we're doing a lot of things that are, again, introducing emerging technology in the most safe and secure way for the user as possible. So that was something that I was interested in learning more. I think working for the government specifically, when I was in consulting, I think there's also a long way to go there, but essentially, it's a journey and we'll get there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Amber. That was amazing. I like the way you you spoke about empathy for the regulators, because
Mhm.
that's not how sometimes the regulators are seen. So that was good to see that perspective.
Absolutely.
So thank you. So I want to switch gears for a little bit because as I spoke to you earlier, I've been doing a lot of roadmap conversations over July and August. And since I have your attention and we're here together, I'd love to ask you a few questions on roadmap. So the first one being, what is a roadmap to you in the financial services space? Talk about the purpose and the goals.
Yeah, I think equal to any product, it's going to be what is the vision, the roadmap, what are we trying to build, and what problems are we trying to solve over time. That's the short and sweet of it. It's if we're thinking about not only the next quarter, but the next year, the next 5 years, what are we actually trying to do, and how can we? I call it disrupt, but how can we change the lens on actually what we're building? So I won't give away what we're working on in my product specifically, but sometimes it may be you saying, what if we didn't actually need this? Like what would our product, or what would the user experience look like if we actually decommissioned our product? And so it's really taking it less from a what we actually want to build from a technology standpoint, and what is the user going toward? What are we actually trying to get toward solving their problems and being more ahead of the game when it comes to what they're actually asking for.
Definitely. That's awesome. And how do you go about getting alignment for buy-in for roadmaps in a regulated environment? Because I'm assuming that legal has a big play here, and there's a lot of various different stakeholders that you'd have to get involved. So how do you go about getting alignment?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I think it's pretty common in any product role. You're going to have to be a huge collaborator and a negotiator. I think we talked about that earlier.
I love that word.
Yeah, having negotiation skills. It's really important to also keep that when you're in the space, the regulator environment, or when you're in financial services. So yes, there may be some things that come down that are really important from a data security and data, if excellence kind of perspective, which is that's top priority. And it's not that you don't have control over those things. It's just that if there's something else that's competing against that's gonna either share the user's experience and enhance their experience, and have a certain metric or OKR that's actually gonna just be the end all be all. It's important to articulate that to our partners, because we do have internal teams who are willing to say, okay, let's see if we can negotiate this with our regulators and see, what's our time frame? How can we work this so that it works for everyone? So I think it's a matter of negotiating, knowing your scope levers, knowing your levers that you can pull and say, okay, we can do this, but how about if we do it a month later? We can do, kind of using the different negotiation tactics that you can.
Excellent. Thank you so much. You made my day. I wasn't expecting you to bring that up, but since you did, you absolutely made my day. All right, so we have two more questions here. Sebastian asks, can you tell us a little bit about product excellence and the maturity of such in a financial institution such as Capital One?
Yeah, product excellence. I personally love the product organization that Capital One has. I will say it's a very thorough organization. And if you're speaking about from a associate perspective, I can speak about that. But if you're speaking about the actual technology that we're building, I can speak about that as well. I think I'll kind of touch on both. I think from a product organization, our product excellence and would circle it around growing and evolving our talent and product is awesome. I will definitely say I'm learning a lot, and I'm growing as a product manager, and kind of pushing the envelope on what's the next step and how can I grow in that space. From a product excellence, from our technology, it's an amazing experience just to be able to work in a company that one is bold enough to say we want to be on the cloud. People are going against that because it has all the other kind of flags that you can think of, but we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do for our customers. And so I think the product organization as a whole is keeping that customer lens, and always thinking about how can we innovate and disrupt banking and change the way we do it. Our one of our values is change banking for good. So it's not just changing it for the good of society and social, but it's also changing it for the good of technology and efficiency. So overall, I love it. It's a really interesting space to play in, and in financial services.
Thank you. We have one more here. What are your thoughts on innovating responsibly and meeting business goals we see some startups start with the intent of being socially responsible, but somehow give up on it due to business demands, from Raj.
Yeah, that is great. And this is a core product thing that you always have to deal with. There's a manager, there's some, there's some organization within the company that wants this thing, and this is like the thing that they have to have. But your users and your responsibility to people who are actually talking to you, who you're building it for, are saying something totally different. And so it's really, again, playing that kind of educator role. I have to sometimes step into my consulting role again and kind of teach people a lot of time, like, this is the way that products are built. This is the way that this is who we're answering to ultimately, which is the user. And we're trying to solve their problems opposed to solve a business. I mean, there are problems that we have to solve for the business, don't get me wrong. But if the users don't like our product and they're not using it, because we're not incorporating their feedback, then none of us are going to be happy. So it's really, you always have to advocate for the user and say, yes, and I don't like to say yes, but like, yes, and we need to make sure we're circling back to that always. So I think, balancing that is really important. And also it's a kind of a play on personality traits too, like being able to partner with your business, business folks who are probably internal. Sometimes you have a board, a board of directors who you also have to partner with, but understanding them from a like kind of emotional intelligence perspective, and understanding like, why are they actually pushing so hard for this? Is it because they have to, or is it because it's the ego thing? Like figuring out how you can kind of, again, use those negotiation skills to say, okay, we'll make sure we get this groomed, and I make sure I have the full context before I actually promise to do it. So a lot of art of negotiation there.
Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Now, what have you learned that you wished you learned earlier in your career?
Oh, this is a good one. There's so many things. I'll say, if I would have to look back on my early product manager career, I would say probably don't be afraid to cause a little conflict, if that makes sense. One thing I love about my director and my leadership at Capital One is that they are so open to saying, well, why? Why do we have to do it that way? I think I have always kind of just taken the feedback and say, okay, we'll do this. Okay, we'll look into that. Okay, this is a good point. We'll look into it. But I now am of the thinking of why do we need that? What is that going to cause, or why are we doing it that way? Even kind of going back to your engineering team and shaking things up a little bit and saying, so why does that matter? Can we do it this way? And that comes with also knowing your product and being really well versed. You can't push back if you don't have a perspective. But I think after you learn a little bit and you feel a little confident in how things are being done, I wish I would have done that a little sooner, opposed to just saying they're the expert, they're going to tell me what to do. And I didn't want to ruffle any feathers, but now I am all for it.
Definitely. Absolutely. I found that if you ask the questions with empathy at heart, it sometimes gets people thinking, and then you start being that thought leader, and people start approaching you and saying, hey, have you seen this? What are your thoughts? Because you know what questions to ask, and it creates that impact and feeling of, what, this product manager knows what they're talking about. Let me run it by them and get their thoughts first.
Oh, 100%. And one word that came to mind when you mentioned that is influence. Yes. The art of influence, the product manager, is so important, because like you said, if someone looks to you as oh, Amber's going to be the person who's going to ask the questions and she knows what to do, that's creating an influence for you, but also for your product. And people are going to be bought in, and people are going to want to know, how can we get on board? How can we make sure we make sure this is successful? Everyone having that shared vision of success for the user, for the product, for the technology. It comes a lot from the influence of you. I know it's a lot of pressure, but yeah. It's fun once you get into it and you try to think about, the why, what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We have one more question here from Raj. What are your top 2-3 books that you recommend for PMs early in their career?
Oh, this is good. I'm actually reading now Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. It is an amazing, just not necessarily a PM book, but it's something that you have to do as a product manager, is a lot of times lead. You're in a leadership position for your product, and not necessarily people, but sometimes there will be opportunities where you're leading people as well. So understanding, leaning into that discomfort, as she talks about, and being okay, being uncomfortable, being vulnerable. Those are things that I find really, really important. Another book that I've read is Sprint. I can't recall the author, but it is essentially talking about how to do iterative product development. That's a great opportunity if you're new to the world of technology and building products, or if you come from a waterfall environment. Learning how to sprint and iteratively work quickly, and not have to see the end goal before you start iterating and changing things. That's very important. So those are my top two.
Thank you. And Sebastian says, prioritize.
Yes.
Guess what? You can't do it all.
Absolutely. Know what you don't know, and make sure that you're asking the right questions always.
Yes. Here we go. Jake Knapp is the book, The Sprint.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we start wrapping up here, what would you like to say to someone who's either thinking of becoming a PM or who is early in their PM career?
I would just say, again, kind of the thread of what my career looks like is always be learning. Never stop learning. Don't think that you have it all. Don't think that you have to have all the knowledge. I attribute a lot of my success for working with really smart people as well, and us collaborating together and solving problems together. So just knowing that you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to have all the answers, but you should always all take the onus on yourself to learn and to be open to growing. Even on my platform and product here at Capital One, I'm always learning from our engineering team. I'm always asking questions. I'm always, kind of asking like, why do we do it that way? And it's really great to work with great people who are open to answering questions. So always be learning.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much. I know you put up your slide, but I've got your Twitter handle right here. So if you're not following Amber on Twitter, please do. She has some awesome content. Thank you so much, Amber. I appreciate your insights. It's been fantastic.
Awesome. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you. So folks who are here live next, actually Wednesday, September 30th, we have a live UX teardown of InVision and working with your design team with Simon McCade. I believe is in the UK or Scotland. I'm not exactly sure the exact location, but it's on the other side of the pond. And we will attempt to do a live UX teardown of InVision. So we hope to see you Wednesday, September 30th at 12 noon Eastern. Thank you so much, Amber. Anything you'd like to say before we end the broadcast?
No, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.